Welcome everyone to my Theory of Group Practice PowerPoint presentation. I hope that you all will enjoy. So the target population, surprise, surprise, Muriel wants to facilitate a support group for people living with the human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, or acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, AIDS. So if we're talking about the target population of the group that I would be facilitating specifically, it'd be preferably 18 and older, given the sensitive nature of sexual transmission and or intravenous drug use. We want to be sure that there is enough commonality among participants. The HIV/AIDS epidemic claimed the lives of thousands of people across the United States since the virus first came to our country in the 1980s, largely in part because big pharmaceutical companies and the U.S. government failed to respond to the crisis until grassroots activists demanded treatment, which can actually be seen in this highly recommended documentary, How to Survive a Plague, should you wish to learn more. Because of the medical advances that have been made to impede HIV/AIDS related deaths, from highly effective antiretroviral, or what they're called ART therapies, to suppress viral loads, to the increasingly used pre-exposure prophylaxis, which is called PrEP, a common misconception that persists is that people no longer have or need services for HIV/AIDS. So just a little fun fact, since Dr. Hicks said to get creative in our presentations, you may notice the pink triangles displayed on the banner of this movie jacket. History tells us that the pink triangle was initially used in Nazi Germany to identify homosexuals who were considered the lowest of the low in the camp hierarchy. The symbol was eventually reclaimed by the LGBTQ community in solidarity of the gay men, as women were not persecuted who were tortured in the concentration camps. Just a fun fact. Well, I guess not so much fun, but an interesting fact. So, moving on, there are certain populations who are disproportionately affected. Those who were colloquially identified to be at greatest risk for contracting HIV/AIDS includes homosexuals, hemophiliacs, heroin addicts, and Haitians, otherwise known as the 4-H Club. While men who have sex with men, which the abbreviation is MSM, to plain and simple, because men who have sex with men can be bi, they can be straight identified and still have sex with men, they could be gay. So basically, men who have sex with men remain a highly vulnerable population. Transgender women or trans women and or people of color, particularly those who are Black and or Hispanic, incur the highest rates of transmission to this day. It is relevant to discuss that these specific groups are so vulnerable due to their intersecting identities between being sexual, gender, when you're talking about the gender specifically for referring to trans women, ethnic and racial minorities. The added barriers that these persons face, such as low education, poverty, and incarceration, directly correlate with high-risk sexual behaviors and contribute to inadequate medical treatment. So we have our group formation and development. So it says as of 2014, more than 350 people in Montgomery County alone were living with HIV, but more recent data from AIDSView indicate that cases have dropped, however, to 206 in Montgomery County. And this looks like that data came from 2018. So from 350 in 2014 to 206 in 2018. So one can only speculate the reasons behind this drastic decrease, like HIV positive people having moved out of our county, or maybe they have died, as there's no known cure for HIV or AIDS yet. Nevertheless, I propose that we partner with HIV/AIDS related organizations to recruit potential participants. So the first one we have on our list is the Compassion Care Clinic. The Compassion Care Clinic provides Spanish-speaking and sliding scale services. So while it's not an HIV clinic, their website explicitly states that they offer HIV and STD screenings. So those who test positive can not only be referred to major programs, but also to support groups, including this one that's in development. And I do want to note that Compassion Care Clinic is here in Clarksville. And next on our list is the Vanderbilt Infectious Diseases Clinic, Clarksville specifically. This clinic specifically provides HIV/AIDS care, but like with Compassion Care, referrals for the support group can be made here. And then we have Nashville Cares. It is the largest HIV/AIDS service provider for Middle Tennessee, and they even expanded their services to Trinity Episcopal Church here in Clarksville in 2013. These services include HIV testing, counseling services, case management, psychoeducation, and a support group in itself. To prevent an overlap in services and potentially causing discord between providers or even creating confusion for clients, a collaboration would absolutely be required before implementing this new group. It would be in the best interest of all stakeholders and would help the facilitators of the proposed group better assess where they are needed in the community specifically. So note that this particular slide does not have transitions. We're just going to talk about the pros and cons because they kind of overlap in some capacities. So group composition and structure. There are pros and cons to both open and closed sessions. While I would prefer to have a set number of sessions and incorporate a psychoeducational curriculum into the group each week, I recognize that there may not be enough of a demand to hold a closed group. Specifically in Clarksville. Even though an open group would be able to accommodate a relatively fixed number of clients who are able to regularly attend or attend as they please as it works with their schedules, we would likely face barriers with attendance and therefore the depth of the group. Like I said, some participants will regularly attend and eventually build a rapport, which can help deepen the focus. But for those who attend sporadically, that lack of rapport may impede the depth that they're able to attain. On the plus side, we would still be able to implement psychoeducational curriculum as topics arise organically in the group. So we would identify the group as a support group, an open support group specifically, when advertising it. Depending on the needs of group members, I think other aspects can also be integrated, as the overlapping and blending of groups in the same group experience often best represent the reality of evolving practice of group work, as is cited in our textbook. We already discussed incorporating psychoeducational curriculum, but therapeutic components can be utilized as well. So in talking about group leadership, I really prefer the concept of co-leading. So although I feel as an experienced leader, I prefer co-leading using the apprentice model, I'm open to other leadership styles based on who would serve as my co-facilitator. If I were to work alongside someone who was as confident as a leader, but had a different leadership style or wanted to take the group in a different direction, I'd be happy to use the alternate model. Additionally, while the shared leading model may not come as naturally to me because I'm used to leading groups, i.e. classrooms as a former teacher, I am always open to expanding my skills and collaborating with my colleagues. I enjoy learning new techniques from them and feel they bring unique perspectives to the table. Benefits of co-leading. With all that said, I am a firm proponent of co-leading versus solo leading for the previously stated reasons, but also because regardless the co-leading model, a co-leader is going to pick up on cues that a solo leader might miss. They add to the planning and debriefing process, and they are able to provide one-on-one assistance to a client or clients during group in the event that crisis intervention is needed. Considering how open support groups can be a little less structured in the sense that a curriculum does not need to be completed in order for participants to quote-unquote graduate, like that which is seen in some psychoeducational groups like Batter's intervention program or domestic violence classes, this really allows for a variety of evidence-based practices to be integrated into the dynamic as various needs or topics arise. So we all know that a common and effective therapeutic modality is CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, whose rational emotive behavior therapy, REBT, model can be easily incorporated into group work. CBT was actually formed when behavior therapy, which focuses on how learning contributes to the development of normal and abnormal behaviors, merged with the concept of how feelings and behavior are influenced by thought patterns, otherwise known as cognitive theory. Merge those two together, cognitive behavioral therapy. So Jacobs et al. 2016 indicates that REBT is effective for groups because it can be easily taught and applied. This statement that might surface during group, for example, I haven't even tried to date or have sex since I tested positive 8 months ago. Let's say we'll look over this. So participants might identify that the thought of this member of putting themselves out there, even thinking about trying to have sex or date other people, so putting themselves out there is the activating event A, which is part of that ABC model that correlates with the REBT practice. So this activating event is then paired with feelings of insecurity and avoidant behaviors, C, again, of ABC. So as we deconstruct the beliefs that lead to this insecurity and avoidance, we may learn that they believe that, or believe, B, from ABC, that they might accidentally infect someone, or that they deserve to contract HIV because they were so promiscuous before testing positive, which we know is not true. Once the belief or beliefs are identified, group members can help the client challenge, dispute, and replace the negative self-talk. So the next evidence-based practice that I think could really be beneficial in this type of open support group is reality therapy. And this is based on William Glasser's choice theory, which focuses on the importance of interpersonal relationships and the satisfaction of human needs. Eventually, Robert Woboulding, who is a clinical psychologist and an internationally known teacher, author, and practitioner of reality therapy, formulated the WDEP system that is applied within reality therapy practice and stands obviously for Want, Doing, Evaluation, and Plan, to help clients change behaviors in a positive way. As an example that we might see in the support group for people living with HIV/AIDS, we examine the statement, I want to start taking my meds regularly. The client has already established the want, and the group participants, with the help of the facilitators and the WDE approach that's been taught, can help them map out the subsequent steps. So in other words, are they identifying what they are doing versus what they want? Do they determine if what they want and what they're doing align, or if they need to evaluate which changes need to be made so that they do align, and finally plan to make reasonable, attainable changes if necessary? So we're continuing into the evidence-based practices. We've already discussed CBT and reality therapy, and we're really only going to talk about this one last practice, even though I'd like to acknowledge that there are plenty of other modalities that obviously could be applied to this dynamic. So the same desire that was stated in the example under reality therapy, I want to start taking my meds regularly, can also be applied to the trans-theoretical model, or TTM. So with this statement, I want to start taking my meds regularly, one would recognize that the participant is in the contemplation stage. There you go, contemplation stage. So I, as a co-leader, would help to try facilitate change by encouraging the client to progress towards the preparation stage, as in motivational interviewing, MI, which can be accomplished with the help of other group members. As you can see here, MI is typically associated with addiction-oriented groups, though I think it can absolutely be applicable to such a group, such as this one, especially considering the stigma that pervades around HIV/AIDS. So help from other members is especially beneficial if they progress towards the latter stages of change, such as action or maintenance. While TTM, founded by Prochaska and DiClemente in the 1970s, is not a theory, and let me emphasize that again, TTM is not a theory, it is the basis for MI. TTM posits that habitual behaviors, like maladaptive coping mechanisms, do not change quickly, but rather occurs through a cyclical process of intentional change. So again, just to reiterate, as I finalize my discussion surrounding evidence-based practices, I'd also just like to mention that in addition to the modalities discussed, plenty of others would benefit this type of group and the populations it would serve. The few that were addressed were only intended to provide a brief overview. The theoretical orientation. So I talked about the theories that correlate with CBT, reality therapy, and TTM. But let's just dive in just to look at the theoretical orientation of the group as an entity. Not only does the use of these different modalities reflect the tenets of integrative theory, which dictates that varied approaches are meant to be applied in conjunction with one another to meet the individualized needs of group members, but they also tie into Harry Stack Sullivan's interpersonal theory. So again, used in conjunction with one another to meet clients' individualized needs, but we're looking at the interpersonal theory that was based on Harry Stack Sullivan. He founded this in the 1920s when treating patients with schizophrenia, actually. This theory later developed into a comprehensive model of group psychotherapy by Irvin Yalom, and postulates that interactions with people, especially those who are significant to one another, strengthens one's sense of security and sense of self and motivates behavioral changes. So in addition to fostering support and community among people living with HIV/AIDS, this support group can also help direct participants towards healthier, safer lifestyle choices, whether through meds compliance, consistent condom use, encouraging loved ones who are HIV negative to use PrEP, to use needle exchange programs to minimize transmission through intravenous drug use, etc. Although one could argue that both the integrative and interpersonal theories essentially describe the general efficacy of groups as a whole, I think it's still highly pertinent to this type of support group nonetheless. The empirical assessment. So we're looking at what the data tells us, what research tells us about these different modalities. So the modalities that were discussed in the previous slides are supported by the text, but are also proven to be effective practices. According to David et al. 2018, CBT is not the best psychotherapeutic modality that can exist, but it is currently the best in the field. As MSW students, we know that CBT can be applied across a breadth of issues, and while there are some limitations to the research that currently exists, the evidence base in support of CBT's efficacy is very strong. Very, very strong. As you can see here, one of reality therapy's main criticisms is the lack of in-depth research, as much had been more anecdotal up until this article was written in 2014. So there may have been other research that supports it since 2014, but I was unable to find anything. So despite this barrier, it is now practiced intercontinentally because it is considered credible and universal. And Bradley 2014 also proposes that because reality therapy and choice theory have existed for decades and have adapted across multicultural contexts, that they will continue to thrive. And now we're looking at the empirical assessment for TTM specifically. Much of the literature examines the effectiveness of TTM on health behavioral changes. I had seen a lot on specifically physical activity, which is indeed relevant to this support group if we're looking at issues surrounding meds compliance or healthier lifestyles to promote longevity for people living with HIV/AIDS. So again, even though it's not specific to this population, I still think it's applicable, the research that was found on TTM. For one, Jimenez Zazu et al. 2020 described TTM as a useful and suitable behavior model. For another, Lenio 2006 states that even though TTM modifies health behavior, the research also indicates that it contains conceptual, methodological, and analytic concerns. Pennington 2020 also agrees that TTM supports behavior change, but not unconditionally, and claims that the stages of change, SOC, the whole stages of change construct, is a variable, not a theory. So going back to what I had talked about previously with my evidence-based practices, this logic is flawed because we had explicitly stated that TTM is a model and not a theory. So by indicating that the contract is a variable, not a theory, that logic is flawed because it's stating the obvious. We already know that TTM is not a theory, not based on theory. It's just a model. So TTM is inherently a model, therefore does not carry the same validity as a theory. But in comparing it as such really only points to the ignorance of the author, in my opinion. Finally, Roman et al. 2018, their findings leaned towards significantly improved behaviors, yet believed that the model's efficacy was based on its theoretical constructs and not the stages of change. So as you can see, the sentiment surrounding TTM and its usefulness in effectuating positive health behavioral changes are underwhelming, unfortunately, and may be better suited for certain diagnostic conditions like substance use disorders, which is what TTM was initially, or really motivational interviewing, which is based off of TTM, has been used for. Nearly all the studies that were reviewed for the purpose of this empirical assessment, including those for CBT and reality therapy, expressed that there were often limitations in the studies that have been conducted and that there was a need either for methodical improvements and or continued research. So of these three approaches, CBT, reality therapy, and TTM, the greatest implications were actually seen in reality therapy and TTM, which makes a whole lot of sense. It's not entirely surprising considering the claimed superiority of CBT. Thank you. I hope you all enjoyed.